What's going on, guys? Alton Anastasia here with FlytPath.com, and in this video I'm going to be talking to you about the new PolarPro long exposure filters for your DJI Mavic 2. So if you guys watched some of my previous videos, I've of course gone through how to dial in filters for your Mavic 2 Zoom as well as your Mavic 2 Pro. But if you guys have seen my channel and know some of my photography, I really like long exposure photography. And with a drone, you're gonna need something like this in order for you to accomplish those long exposures during the day. Now, PolarPro offers a range of long exposure ND filters. This is an ND 128 all the way up to a 256 1000, and they even have an ND 10000 filter for your Mavic 2 Pro. Now, the reason why I'm shooting, of course, in bright daylight is that this is something that was really hard to achieve with any drone, and that's to be able to open up that shutter speed long enough to get a long exposure photo during the day. Now, if you guys have seen some of my previous videos, I of course would normally go early morning or later in the evening in order for me to accomplish these long exposure photos. And the reason why I did that is because I needed that light to be a little bit darker. But with ND filters like this, ideally, we should be able to do long exposure photos even in bright daylight. Right now it is bright. The sun, as you can see, is piercing right down on me. Now with the Mavic 2 Pro, even though you are able to adjust the aperture to get the sharpest image, you're gonna wanna stay at the lower aperture ranges like f2.8 all the way up to around 5.6. Now, if you're at 2.8 or 5.6, which means it's a pretty large opening as far as an aperture goes, a lot of light's gonna be coming through, and now the only way you're able to now keep that shutter speed open for about a second or so is to introduce something like a really strong ND filter, and that's the reason why PolarPro and some other companies have been coming out with them for your DJI Mavic. Now, if you guys watch my Zoom video and how I quickly was able to choose the right ND strength, I'm gonna be doing the same concept here. Of course, I'm gonna be changing a couple things, like how long I want that shutter speed to be open, as well as what my aperture is gonna be. It's a super bright day, which means I'm gonna know I want my ISO at 100, so that already takes away one exposure out of the equation. So now I'm gonna go through and show you how I dial in the other two. Now, when it comes down to dialing in how to get the proper exposure when it comes to photography and long exposure, the concept is actually the same as it is when you're doing it for video, which means for video, if you're shooting at 30 frames a second, you're gonna want your shutter speed down to about 1/60th of a second. So you're gonna find the right filter that gets you to that shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. And because I've shot some of these photos before, I kind of know the range where I wanna be at. And the great thing with the Mavic 2 is that you're able to now adjust that aperture. So what you need to do is initially just get the exposure down into a pretty solid range, and you can start making some micro adjustments from there. So what I'm gonna do right now is just kind of go through with you the process I take to try to pick the right filter to get the right exposure for the photos I want right above this water right here, as well as a hut over at Wind and Sea. Now, ideally, to get the sharpest types of photos, you want to stick with the lower aperture, so 2.8 all the way up to like 5.6 or 6.3. So if I want to stay in that range, and the great thing is, like I mentioned with the Mavic 2, is that you're able to adjust that. Let's stick it for now into the f5 range. The great thing is with that, we can adjust it and do some micro adjustments as we go, as we dial it in when we get up in the air. So now with my ISO 100, my aperture is at 5.0. The next thing I want to do in order for me to do long exposure photos is to be able to slow that shutter speed down all the way to about a second. Now, as you can see here, in order for me to get proper exposure right now, I'm at 1/500th of a second, which of course is way too fast. Now, in order for me to do long exposure photos, I already know that I want my exposure to be about the 1 second range, and we can adjust that once we get up in the air. But just to get everything set initially, we want to be about the 1 second mark. Then we can make some adjustments again once we get up in the air. So as you can see right here, 1/640th of a second at 5.0 aperture with ISO 100, I'm about the right exposure. But if I want to drop that down all the way to 1 second, 1.3, 1.6 seconds, as you can see at 1 second, if I were to take that photo, which I'll do right now, it is completely washed out. It is way overexposed. Now, in order for me to find the right filter to use for a day like this, which is a nice bright day, all I have to do is do the exact same thing like I did when I was setting up my filters for the Zoom, and that's just go through the range of filters that PolarPro offers to choose which one will best expose your image at 1 second. So as you can see right now, it is of course blown out, but if I put this right over it, it is still way too bright. I can start seeing it a little bit, but it's still way too bright. So that was a 128. Let's try a 256, a little bit better. Look at that. Not bad. So I can start seeing a little bit more. Let's go to an ND 1000 and see what we get here. There you go. So look at that. Starting to look really, really good. There it is right there. An ND 1000 would get me a pretty decent exposure. As you can see, my histogram right there is right in the middle. So from what I can see right now, just putting that over the lens, an ND 1000 could get me in that range of proper exposure for 1 second photography. Now, like I mentioned, the great thing is with an adjustable aperture like the Mavic 2 Pro, I can make adjustments. I can now get it up in the air and see exactly how it looks, make the adjustment to, you know, a f6.3, or if I need to bring it down to like an f4, f2.8, I can make those micro adjustments. But the one thing you want to do is make sure that you're able to get the right exposure before you take off. Because if you didn't, if I flew it up there with a 128, I would have to fly it all the way back, change it out, put it back up again, fly it back down. So what you want to do is get it close to the right exposure on the ground. That way when you're up in the air, all you're doing is some micro adjustments. Switch this out with the ND 1000. I'm at ISO 100. I am at f5.0. Shutter speed's at 1 second. Click halfway to focus it. Take that photo. Now it's at 1 second. So if I preview that, I should be able to see some motion in the water, as I can see right there, which means I know I'm pretty good at that level as far as exposure goes. Let's take it up in the air, point these straight down, and see what type of photos we get from the air. Now here's a few photos I was able to take during this session, and as you can see in each photo, I was making some small adjustments to either the aperture or the shutter speed, depending on the angle I was at, depending on how the lighting was, and also how much movement I wanted to see in the water. That's one of the benefits of using the Mavic 2, where you're able to adjust that aperture and shutter speed on the fly. So what you really want to do is just kind of set everything up on ground first, then you're able to make those micro adjustments in the air. Make sure you guys check out my filter playlist. There's a bunch of videos in there that talk a little bit more about not only photography, but also videography and how to set up your filters properly. I hope you guys got some value from my video, and as always, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell to be notified when I post new videos. This is Aldrin Saucio with FlytPath.com. I'll see you guys next one. Take care.